A dead sheriff's final request forced a cowboy to marry his widow, but one sentence hidden in an old letter made them both question what really happened the night he died. The courthouse doors slammed open just as Evelyn stumbled backward, a leather ledger clutched against her chest. Outside, cold wind whipped dust across Main Street. A horse snorted. Boots pounded on wooden boards. Across the crowd, Colt froze when he saw the rifle pointed in her direction, and the man holding it wasn't supposed to be there at all. Then someone shouted a name that changed the entire room. If you love unforgettable Western love stories, share where you're watching from and join us for the journey ahead. The wind moved slowly across the cemetery outside Silver Mesa. Dry grass bent beneath it. A few yellow leaves rolled between the gravestones and settled near a mound of fresh earth. Evelyn Carter stood alone beside that earth. Most people had already left. The preacher had closed his Bible. The wagon drivers had returned to town. Even the men who had carried the coffin were halfway down the hill. Only Evelyn remained. Her black dress shifted softly in the autumn breeze. Dust clung to the hem where it brushed the ground. In front of her rested a simple wooden marker. Sheriff Owen Carter, born 1850, died 1889. No grand speech could make those dates feel real. For 10 years, Owen had filled every room he entered. Now all that remained was silence. Behind her, a few voices drifted through the wind, not loud, not meant for her, yet close enough. Terrible thing. He shouldn't have been riding that mountain road alone. He was probably trying to get home before the storm. A pause, then another voice. Or maybe he was worried about leaving her by herself. More silence. Evelyn lowered her eyes. She had heard whispers her entire marriage. Some people had accepted her. Many never had. Silver Mesa was a small town. Small towns remembered differences longer than kindness. She did not turn around. She did not give them the satisfaction. Instead, she rested one gloved hand on the top of the marker. The wood felt rough beneath her fingers. "Goodbye, Owen," she whispered. The wind carried the words away. A horse approached somewhere behind her. Heavy hooves, slow, familiar. She looked up. Colt Harrison had stopped several yards away. He removed his hat. Neither of them spoke immediately. The mountains stretched behind him, blue-gray beneath a cloudy sky. Colt looked tired, not from ranch work, from grief. Owen had been his closest friend. "We should head back," he said quietly. Evelyn nodded. Neither of them mentioned the empty space left behind. Some things were too large for words. The ride into town passed in silence. Wagons rattled over uneven boards. Smoke drifted from chimneys. Storekeepers swept dust from their porches. Life continued. It always did. By afternoon, nearly half the town had gathered inside Judge Walter Finch's office. People squeezed shoulder to shoulder. Curiosity had traveled faster than grief. Evelyn sat near the window. Colt stood against the wall. Judge Finch unfolded several documents and adjusted his spectacles. The late Sheriff Owen Carter left a final directive. The room grew still. Even the floorboards seemed to stop creaking. Walter cleared his throat. "Mrs. Carter will retain ownership of the sheriff's residence and all materials contained within it under one condition." Evelyn frowned. One condition? That was not something Owen had ever mentioned. The judge continued. "Within 30 days of this reading, Mrs. Carter must enter into lawful marriage with Mr. Colt Harrison." For a moment, nobody breathed. The room simply froze. A woman near the door gasped. Someone dropped a coffee cup. The sharp crack echoed through the office. Evelyn stared at the judge. Surely she had heard wrong. Across the room, Colt looked equally stunned. "What?" he said. It was the first word he had spoken all afternoon. Judge Finch lowered the paper. The instruction is written clearly and signed by Sheriff Carter himself. Murmurs exploded around the room. People leaned toward one another. Questions flew in every direction. Evelyn heard none of them. Her ears rang. Marriage? To Colt? She barely noticed when the meeting ended. Barely noticed the townspeople filing out into the street. By sunset, she was standing alone inside the house she had shared with Owen. The rooms felt strange. Too quiet. Too large. His coffee mug still rested beside the stove. His coat still hung by the door. Everything looked exactly the same. Yet nothing was. She lit a kerosene lamp. Its warm glow pushed back the darkness. Then she carried it into Owen's office. The room smelled faintly of leather and paper. Shelves lined the walls. Ledgers sat stacked in careful rows. A metal lockbox rested beneath the desk, and in the corner stood a cedar trunk. The last trunk. The one Owen never allowed anyone else to open. Evelyn knelt beside it. The hinges groaned softly. Inside were old reports, maps, receipts, bundles of correspondence tied with string. She sorted through them slowly. Then her fingers stopped. A single folded envelope. No address. No seal. Only her name. Evelyn. Her heartbeat quickened. She opened it. Inside was one sheet of paper. One sentence. Nothing more. Her eyes moved across the line. Then she read it again. And again. The lamp flame flickered beside her. Outside, the first drops of rain tapped softly against the window. Evelyn stared at the words Owen had left behind. A chill moved through the room. Not from the weather. From the realization that her husband had known something before he died. Something important. Something dangerous. The note contained only 7 words. Don't trust anyone inside town hall. Evelyn sat at Owen's desk long after midnight. The lamp burned low. Rain tapped softly against the window pane. She turned the paper over. Nothing. No signature. No explanation. Just 7 words written in Owen's careful hand. By dawn, the note was folded inside her Bible. 3 weeks later, Silver Mesa gathered again. This time not for a funeral, for a wedding. The little wooden church stood alone beyond the edge of town where the prairie met the foothills. The grass had turned gold with autumn. A cold wind carried the smell of wood smoke and distant cattle. No one seemed happy to be there. Judge Walter Finch stood at the front. Colt Harrison waited beside him. His black coat looked stiff, as if he had borrowed it for the occasion. Evelyn walked down the aisle alone. No music, no flowers, no smiling relatives. Only the sound of boots shifting across old floorboards. When Judge Finch finished the ceremony, silence filled the church. No applause followed. No celebration. People simply stood and watched, as if they were witnessing a business arrangement instead of a marriage. Outside, wagons rolled away one by one. Within minutes, the churchyard was empty. Colt helped Evelyn into the wagon without saying much. The ride to Harrison Ridge Ranch took nearly an hour. The road wound through open grassland dotted with grazing cattle. Cottonwood trees lined the creek crossing. Far beyond them, the mountains rose beneath a pale sky. The ranch appeared at sunset. A wide white house, red barns, long fences stretching toward the horizon, smoke drifting from a stone chimney. Ben McCall met them at the gate. He removed his hat politely. "Ma'am." Evelyn offered a small nod. Nothing more. Everyone seemed unsure of what to call this new arrangement. The first days passed carefully. Colt slept in the tack room beside the saddle racks. Evelyn stayed in the bedroom at the end of the hallway. At breakfast, they exchanged few words. Coffee, biscuits, weather. Then silence. Yet small things began to change. One afternoon, Evelyn noticed a stack of unpaid invoices tucked inside a drawer near the ranch office. Feed deliveries, fence repairs, freight receipts. The numbers did not match. She spent 2 evenings checking every ledger line by line. On Friday morning, she quietly placed a corrected account book in front of Colt. He studied it, then looked up. "You found all that?" There was more money missing than there should have been. Colt said nothing for several seconds. Finally, he nodded once. "Thank you." The words sounded unfamiliar coming from him. A week later, Evelyn stopped Ben from signing a cattle contract that would have cost the ranch hundreds of dollars. Then he uncovered missing payroll funds that had somehow vanished during the summer drive. Word traveled through Harrison Ridge quickly. People began looking at her differently. Not as the sheriff's widow, not as Colt's reluctant wife, but as someone who noticed details others missed. One evening, she found Colt repairing a broken gate by lantern light. The temperature had dropped sharply. Without a word, she set a cup of hot coffee beside him. He glanced up. Their eyes met briefly. Neither spoke, yet neither looked away immediately. The moment lingered. Small, quiet, important. Then came the storm. It arrived after midnight. Wind screamed across the prairie. Rain hammered the roof. A ranch hand pounded on the front door. "Fire!" Colt was already moving. By the time Evelyn reached the porch, orange light flickered across the darkness. The hay barn was burning. Men rushed with buckets. Horses screamed from nearby corrals. Rain eventually helped kill the flames. Near dawn, only blackened beams remained. Ben kicked through the wet ashes, then stopped. "Colt." Everyone gathered. Scrawled across a surviving wall in dark paint were 7 chilling words. "What Owen stole will soon return." No one spoke. Rain dripped from broken rafters. Colt stared at the message. Evelyn felt her hand tighten around the folded note hidden inside her coat pocket. For the first time since Owen's death, 2 separate warnings suddenly felt connected. And somewhere beyond the ranch, someone wanted them to notice. The burned words stayed in Evelyn's mind for days. "What Owen stole will soon return." She replayed them while balancing account books, while helping Ben inventory feed barrels, while standing at the kitchen sink watching morning frost melt from the pasture fences. Nothing about Owen fit those words. Not the man she had known. Not the sheriff who spent long nights settling disputes between neighbors. Yet the note hidden inside her Bible suggested he had been afraid of something, or someone. One cold morning, Colt placed a worn leather journal on the kitchen table. "I found this in Owen's office." Evelyn set down her coffee cup. The journal looked familiar. She remembered seeing it on Owen's desk years ago. Most pages contained dates and brief notes, livestock disputes, property surveys, meeting schedules. Then the entries changed. Mayor Gideon Price. Again and again. Entire pages filled with observations. Land transfers, missing records, families losing property after questionable court rulings. Several names were circled. The Miller family, the Dawson family, the Granger brothers, small ranchers who had somehow lost everything. Evelyn looked up. Owen was investigating him. Colt nodded. For a long time. 2 days later, they rode north toward Elk Canyon. The trail followed an old freight route, winding through cottonwoods and rocky hills. Snow clouds gathered over the mountains. Their horses moved steadily through the narrow pass. At midday, they stopped near an abandoned line shack listed in Owen's notes. Inside, they found old survey maps, property markers, and several receipts bearing Gideon Price's signature. Nothing proved wrongdoing, but none of it felt right. By late afternoon, the weather turned. Wind swept down from the peaks. Snow began falling sideways. Within an hour, The trail disappeared beneath white drifts. "We need shelter," Colt said. They pushed forward until they found a hunter's cabin tucked among pine trees. The structure leaned slightly, but still stood. Inside, Colt built a small fire. Orange light danced across rough log walls. Snow tapped against the roof. For a while, neither spoke. The storm wrapped the cabin in silence. Evelyn sat near the fire reading through Owen's notes. Colt repaired a broken lantern strap with a pocket knife and a strip of leather. Simple work. Steady work. The kind that filled empty spaces. Eventually, he glanced toward her. "You don't have to carry this alone." Evelyn looked up. The firelight softened the hard lines of his face. "I know. You act like you do." A faint smile touched her lips. "Maybe I'm still learning." Colt nodded once. No speeches followed. No dramatic promises. Just a quiet understanding. The kind built one day at a time. The storm finally passed near dawn. They returned to Silver Mesa the next afternoon. The town looked normal from a distance. Store signs swayed. Children ran between wagons. Smoke rose from chimneys. Then Ben came running from the ranch office. His face said everything before he spoke. "You need to see this." Evelyn's stomach tightened. Minutes later, they stood inside the old sheriff's office. Drawers had been pulled open. Papers scattered. Shelves emptied. The lockbox smashed. Every file Owen had collected was gone. Someone had known exactly what to take. Colt slowly removed his hat. Whoever did this wasn't looking for money. "No," Evelyn said quietly. "They were looking for evidence." That night, neither of them slept much. Wind rattled the windows. The house creaked softly around them. Just before dawn, a knock sounded at the front door. Ruth Carter stood outside. Owen's mother looked older than she had at the funeral. The lines around her eyes seemed deeper. She accepted a cup of coffee but never touched it. For several minutes, she stared into the kitchen stove. Then she finally spoke. "There was something Owen never wanted me to tell." The room fell silent. Colt leaned forward. Evelyn waited. Ruth twisted her wedding ring slowly around her finger. 3 months before he died, he started receiving letters. "What kind of letters?" Evelyn asked. "Threats." The word landed heavily. Ruth swallowed. "He burned most of them. Said he didn't want to worry anyone." Colt's jaw tightened. "Why didn't he tell me? He thought he could handle it himself." Ruth looked toward the window. The first sunlight of morning was touching the frost outside. "He told me if anything happened to him, it wouldn't be an accident." No one moved. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed louder. Ruth finally met Evelyn's eyes. "The day before he left for that mountain road, he came by my house." Her voice trembled. "He hugged me longer than usual." A long pause followed. Then she whispered the words she had carried ever since. "He said there was a chance he might not come home." The kitchen went completely still. Outside, somewhere beyond the ranch house, a gate creaked in the morning wind. Inside, Evelyn felt the pieces shifting. Owen had known. The threats. The warning note. The stolen files. The fire. None of it was random. And for the first time since his death, the question was no longer whether someone had wanted Owen silenced. The question was why. Winter settled over Silver Mesa early that year. The first hard freeze arrived before Thanksgiving. Frost covered the fence rails each morning. Water troughs formed thin sheets of ice overnight. Ranch hands stamped their boots beside the bunkhouse stove before daylight. At Harrison Ridge, trouble seemed to arrive with the cold. The letter from the bank came first. Ben carried it into the ranch office one gray morning. Colt broke the seal and read it twice. His expression never changed. That worried Evelyn more than anger would have. What is it? The loan note. Evelyn looked up from the ledger. It isn't due until spring. According to them, it is now. He handed her the paper. The bank demanded immediate payment. No explanation, no negotiation. Just a date and a signature. 3 days later, another problem arrived. A cattle shipment scheduled for Helena was canceled without warning. Then another. Then another. The freight company suddenly claimed there was no available space. Ben threw his hat onto a chair. They've hauled for us for 7 years. They have new instructions, Colt said quietly. Everyone knew what that meant. No one said it aloud. Meanwhile, the town began talking. People always talked. At the general store, at the church steps, at Miller's Cafe beside the train depot. Some said Evelyn had convinced Colt to marry her for the ranch. Others claimed the sheriff's widow was somehow responsible for the fire. By Christmas week, even old friends seemed uncertain. When Evelyn entered a room, conversations often stopped. Not completely. Just enough. The silence said the rest. One afternoon, she returned from town carrying flour and coffee. She found Colt repairing a section of fence near the south pasture. Snowflakes drifted through the air. He worked without gloves despite the cold. Evelyn stood beside the fence for a moment. People are starting to believe it. Colt continued hammering. Believe what? That I brought trouble here. The hammer paused, only for a second. Then he drove another nail. I don't. The answer came so simply that she almost missed it. No speech, no dramatic defense, just certainty. Something warm settled quietly inside her chest. The feeling stayed there all afternoon. 2 weeks later, a break finally came. While sorting through Owen's remaining papers, Evelyn found a receipt hidden inside an old law book. A shipping receipt, dated 6 months before Owen's death. Attached was a name. Eli Crowley. She stared at it. The son of Silas Crowley, one of the wealthiest businessmen in the territory. A man rarely seen in town. A man who spent most of his time traveling. That evening she showed the paper to Colt. Neither slept much. 3 days later they found Eli in a small boarding house near Livingston. He looked exhausted, like someone who had been carrying a secret for too long. When Evelyn showed him the receipt, he didn't deny anything. Instead, he closed the door, then pulled the curtains. You shouldn't have come here. Evelyn exchanged a glance with Colt. Why? Eli rubbed both hands across his face, because he looked afraid, not nervous, afraid. My father and Gideon Price have been working together for years. The room went silent. Outside, wagon wheels rattled over frozen ground. Inside, nobody moved. Eli opened a small metal case beneath the bed. From it, he removed a thick ledger bound in cracked brown leather. I think Owen knew. Knew what? Colt asked. Eli swallowed. The land transfers. He opened the ledger. Page after page revealed payments, property acquisitions, false appraisals, hidden partnerships. Several family ranches had been forced into debt before being quietly purchased through intermediaries. The signatures appeared again and again. Gideon Price, Silas Crowley. The evidence was overwhelming. Owen planned to expose them, Eli said. My father found out. A long silence followed. The wind rattled the boarding house window. Finally, Evelyn spoke. Is that why Owen died? Eli lowered his eyes. I don't know exactly what happened, but the answer was already there. No one needed to say it. When they finally left, the ledger sat inside Evelyn's satchel. For the first time, they possessed proof. Real proof. Enough to destroy powerful men. Enough to explain the threats. Enough to explain the fire. Enough to explain Owen. The return trip began under clear skies. By evening, snow clouds rolled in, dark, heavy, promising another storm. They reached Harrison Ridge shortly after sunset. The ranch house glowed warmly against the darkness. For the first time in months, hope seemed possible. Ben met them at the porch. "You found something?" Colt looked toward Evelyn. "We did." Ben grinned. A rare sight. Inside, coffee brewed on the stove. The kitchen felt warmer than usual. Safer. Almost peaceful. Then the lights outside disappeared, one by one, as though someone were moving through the property, watching, waiting. Later that night, Evelyn carried the ledger upstairs. She locked it inside the dresser drawer beside Owen's note. The house had gone quiet. The wind had started again. She sat briefly on the edge of the bed. Then she heard something. A sound downstairs. A floorboard. A door. Maybe. Maybe not. She stood. Listened. Nothing. The silence returned. A little too quickly. The next thing she remembered was darkness. Cold air. The smell of damp wood. And movement. Somewhere far away, a wagon wheel rolled over frozen ground. When Evelyn opened her eyes, the room around her was unfamiliar. Her hands were free. But the door was locked. A single lantern burned near the wall. And suddenly she understood. Someone had waited until they found the truth, then moved. The ledger was gone. And so was she. Colt knew it before anyone said the words aloud. The empty room told the story. The open drawer, the overturned chair, the cold lantern still burning on the bedside table. Snow blew against the window panes while Ben searched the house. Ruth stood in the hallway clutching her shawl. No one spoke much. There was nothing to say. Colt found tracks behind the house before sunrise. A wagon. 2 horses. Headed west. Toward Bitter Mesa. He knelt in the snow for several seconds, then stood. "We ride." The search lasted all day and all night. Wind swept across the frozen hills. Moonlight reflected off patches of snow between the pines. Ben rode beside him. 3 ranch hands followed behind. No one complained. No one slowed down. Near dawn, they found an abandoned mining camp tucked between 2 ridges. Most of the buildings had collapsed years earlier. Only one structure still stood. A long wooden warehouse with broken windows. A lantern glowed inside. Colt dismounted before his horse fully stopped. His boots struck frozen ground. The cold air burned his lungs. For the first time since Owen's funeral, fear reached him. Not for the ranch, not for the evidence, for Evelyn. Inside the warehouse, Evelyn sat tied to a chair near a cast-iron stove. She looked tired, cold, but unbroken. The ledger rested on a table nearby. Mayor Gideon Price stood beside it. Silas Crowley stood near the doorway. Neither man looked surprised to see Colt. In fact, they looked disappointed. "As stubborn as Owen," Gideon said. Colt never answered. His eyes remained on Evelyn. She met his gaze, a tiny nod. She was all right. That was enough. The sheriff from the neighboring county arrived minutes later with several deputies. Judge Walter Finch had quietly sent word the night before, after hearing rumors in town. Suddenly, Gideon and Silas no longer controlled the room. The balance shifted. Fast. The ledger opened, pages turned, signatures appeared, transactions, land purchases, false debts, names, dates, proof, years of it. Gideon's confidence vanished first. Silas lasted only a few minutes longer. By noon, both men were under arrest. The warehouse emptied slowly. Deputies gathered documents. Witnesses signed statements. Snow drifted lazily outside. For the first time in months, the air felt lighter. Yet the real ending came later. Not in the warehouse, not in court, not even in town. It came back at Harrison Ridge. 3 weeks later, the legal process had begun. Several families recovered property. Others received compensation. Silver Mesa seemed quieter now, as though the town itself were tired. One evening, Judge Finch arrived carrying a sealed envelope. The handwriting on the front belonged to Owen Carter. Evelyn recognized it instantly. So did Colt. The three of them sat near the fireplace. The flames crackled softly. Outside, winter wind moved across the prairie. Judge Finch unfolded the letter, then began reading. If you are hearing this, then circumstances unfolded the way I feared they might. The room grew still. Evelyn lowered her eyes. For a moment she could almost hear Owen's voice. I know people will question why I placed such a strange condition in my will. Judge Finch continued. I did not do it to protect my house. A pause. I did not do it to protect my records. The fire shifted. A log settled deeper into the coals. I did it because there is only one man I trust more than myself to look after Evelyn. Colt stared at the floor. His hands remained folded quietly in his lap. That man is Colt Harrison. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. Not from grief, from something gentler, something warmer. Judge Finch read the final lines slowly. Colt has always been stronger than he realizes. Evelyn has always been braver than she believes. Separately, they survive. Together, they might finally find a home. Silence filled the room after the reading ended. No one rushed to speak. Some moments deserved space. Judge Finch quietly excused himself. The front door closed behind him. The house became still again. Only the fire remained. Colt stood and crossed the room. From his coat pocket, he removed a folded document. He placed it on the table. Evelyn looked down. Marriage annulment papers. Her name already signed where necessary. If you want your freedom, he said softly, you can leave. The words hung between them. No pressure, no expectations, just a choice. Perhaps the first completely free choice either of them had been given in a long time. Evelyn looked at the paper, then at the fire, then at Colt. The man who had never tried to own her, never tried to control her, never asked her to become someone else. Slowly she picked up the document, walked to the fireplace, and fed it to the flames. The paper curled, darkened, then disappeared. Neither spoke. There was no need. Evelyn turned back toward him. For a second they simply stood there. The firelight danced across the room. Outside, snow drifted past the windows. Inside, something finally settled into place. She reached for his hand. Colt took hers, not because a will demanded it, not because a town expected it, not because a dead man arranged it, but because somewhere along the road between grief and truth, between loneliness and trust, they had chosen each other. And for the first time since Owen's death, the future no longer felt like something to survive. It felt like something worth walking toward together. As the snow drifted across the Montana prairie, and the lights of Harrison Ridge glowed softly against the winter night, it became clear that this story was never really about a will, a ranch, or even a mystery hidden in old ledgers. It was about two people carrying more loneliness than anyone could see. If you were standing where Evelyn once stood, grieving, uncertain, wondering whether life still had something good waiting ahead, would you have found the courage to trust again? And if you were in Colt's boots, would you have opened your heart after years of keeping it guarded? Sometimes the hardest thing in life is not surviving loss. It is believing that healing is still possible afterward. Evelyn and Colt did not find happiness because life became easy. They found it because they kept choosing kindness when bitterness would have been simpler. They kept showing up. They kept believing that another person could be worth the risk. Maybe that's the quiet truth hidden inside stories like this. Love is not always the lightning strike people talk about. Sometimes it's the hand that stays, the voice that remains gentle, the person who gives you freedom and hopes you'll stay anyway. If this story meant something to you, tell us where you're watching from and what moment touched you the most. And if you'd like to spend more evenings beside campfires, old ranch roads, forgotten mysteries, and stories about people finding their way back to one another, we would be honored to have you join us again for the next journey. Until then, take care of yourself and keep a little room in your heart for second chances.